All right. This interview is going to be awesome. I'm really excited today to talk about connection deserts. Gabe DeRita, here with Gabe DeRita, and he and I met back when we were in the thick of things with COVID.
Yep.
We happened to meet by chance. And since then, we've had several conversations. He's a coach and facilitator. He does a ton of communications work, authentic relating facilitator, team leadership, purpose alignment. And he does it virtually. He does it in person. In fact, he just got back from Guatemala doing a leadership purpose alignment retreat with a company. And he and I just like we've had awesome conversations about
Yeah.
this concept of the connection desert that we live in, and how people aren't connecting on a level that is important to connect on, like the base human level. And how do you create moments and serendipity that promotes authentic connection? And so I'm really excited to do this interview today with you, Gabe, and I appreciate you taking the time, because I think we both kind of share this a similar worldview, and I'm excited to unpack that with you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I appreciate you bringing me on. I know it's been a bit of a moving target making this happen. So I'm grateful that we finally got to drop in and do this.
Yes, absolutely. I am too. So kind of framing this idea or this conversation, what does that mean? Can you help us understand a little bit, like we both came up with this idea of what we wanted to talk about today, but when you think of a connection desert, what is it that you think of?
Yeah, for me, it's really more about like the depth and quality of connection that seems to be more missing. Like we have a lot of surface level or superficial or app mediated connection now, but what's really harder and harder to come by is this sense of real like depth and intimacy in connection. And to me, it stems from a lot of places, but I think a big one that sort of rose up during COVID was like everything being fragmented and pushed into digital spaces and not a lot of like chances to be really kind of who we were. There's a lot of performative roles that our culture asks us to take on, and it's just leading to people kind of not showing up feeling like they have permission to ask for what they need or being like willing to reveal what's going on for them and just sort of stuffing themselves into roles and categories that people think they want, or think that others want. And so when I think of connection desert, I think of like um yeah, the lack of spaces where people can really open up and be genuine with each other, be authentic with each other, give and share, real feedback. This is a problem for organizations a lot. Like leaders aren't open to feedback, so people just tell them what they want to hear. It's like an Achilles heel for leaders that I see happening a lot. And so that's what it means to me. This connection desert is like a lack of authentic spaces where people can come together as human beings, share their experience, reveal what's going on for them, and be welcomed in that, and be seen in that. That's something that people deeply need, and I think it's something that's largely missing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the biggest opportunity that we have in the workforce moving forward is in the digital space. How do you create those moments where people can connect? And I've actually had the opportunity to go to one of your authentic relating facilitated events and was able to get into some really cool conversations with people and open up and be vulnerable. And I think vulnerability is a big part of that, is creating a space where people can be vulnerable. And when they are, it creates an opportunity for people to see you as you, who you are.
Mhm.
And so going back, based off of your experience, again, you're facilitating virtually, you're facilitating in live. Is it possible to create experiences virtually where people can authentically connect?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been doing it. There was a period at the beginning of quarantine where I was facilitating at least 1 hour event a week for this public platform that I work on. Just because it was like, it was so needed. I needed it. It was good medicine for me too. And the people who were in these spaces were like, God, like this is the thing that I'm missing right now. Because I think human beings are really adaptable, right? And there's a lot of things about the digital environment that aren't ideal. but if it's what we have to work with, people will jump in and kind of roll with it. And I have seen digital spaces be really intimate, be really profound, give people that sense of really being with one another. And to me, it comes through a kind of how we approach the process, how the space is kind of designed, or facilitated. People say like the container you create, is really important. You give people permission to play by certain rules. You give people permission to not play by other rules, to not do the thing that's maybe the kind of programmatic response, and give them a chance to slow down and name deeper layers of their experience, or to have the psychological safety to reveal those parts of it, that can create a sense of real trust and intimacy even in a digital environment. And oftentimes it doesn't have to be this like scary squishy thing. Like vulnerability, I think it's a bit of a buzzword, and there's still a lot of like entangled meanings with that. Like
Totally.
you think of, in our culture, vulnerability means like weakness,
Let
attack.
let's talk about child issues. Like let's go deep. Let's go all the way down, right?
Yeah, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're not
Mm-mm.
talking about like bearing your soul to your colleagues. It's like it's not necessarily the answer, right? But what vulnerability means is just that, like you said, the strength to be seen and known in your experience, or to see others in theirs, to get a sense of what's really going on. Um, and vulnerability doesn't mean like a weak spot. It means, in a way, transparency or honesty. And we've seen leaders move in this direction. Like people aren't, you and I don't have the digital background on, right? Like people are like having Zoom meetings with their kids or their kitchen in the background. Like people are seeing into each other's lives in a new way. I remember even in the peak of the quarantine, there was like people like doing um shows from their home. You know what I mean? Like the production studios were closed, so you just saw this superstar's living room, right? So like you're getting access to a part of who they are as a human being.
Hmm.
And I think that's the part that really creates a lot of power for disconnected teams. Like I facilitated a retreat for an organization that was doing global pandemic response. And so you had disease experts scattered around the city, from Johannesburg, South Africa, to Singapore, to New York, and just giving them a chance to kind of tell each other stories about who they were, because they had never met in person before. You could feel the energy in the group really kind of lean in. Like people were curious about each other. They wanted to follow up. It wasn't just, oh, I know this person does communications. Oh, this person does compliance. It's like, oh my God, I want to hear that story about you when you got kidnapped. It was like something exciting happening about this person's life that kind of brought a little color to who they were. They weren't just a little box on the screen anymore.
Totally. I have a saying, the shortest distance, it's actually Patty Dean, but she said the shortest distance between two people is a story. And you hear a
Yep,
lot of like
that's
Zoom
it.
fatigue is real. And I think when we look virtually, even the conversations you and I have had, and a lot of the meetings that we facilitate, that you don't see Zoom fatigue in
Mm-mm.
these meetings. What we're talking about, when you're able to get people to chat and be vulnerable, like Zoom fatigue doesn't exist. And I think Zoom fatigue is a little bit misbranded. The way that people want to connect with people, people are fatigued that they have to go to another Zoom meeting and consume one-way content, right?
Yes, it's
But
engagement that you're talking about.
yes, it's engagement fatigue. It's this, you can only stare at a screen and hear someone chat for so long. At some
Mm.
point, you have to integrate this ability to have a conversation. And that's where I love how you just took a stop and we unpacked vulnerability, because vulnerability can be as simple as sharing a story from your life,
Yeah.
and it allows you to see somebody. Now I know, that story will always be connected to you.
Right, and it gives you some context to relate to that person because maybe you share part of that experience, right? And as simple as like, you know, show of hands for the parents in the room who didn't get enough sleep last night. We'll move a little slower for you guys. And, just, oh yeah, there's 6 other parents on this call. I feel a little bit more seen and safer here, right? Like knowing that somebody else shares your experience. Um, and things like just asking people to type in the chat, right? That's a facilitation trick I use a lot. Just like put one word in the chat about how you feel on this topic, or like, speed up, slow down, the little hand signals, or just giving people a chance to go to breakouts and shifting the size of the space, because sometimes people feel really challenged sharing in a big group, right? So it's like, hey, we're going to put you in triads to just debrief, right? And like come back with questions that are maybe summarized from your team. It gives people like, they know they're important. They know their voice is valued. They feel like they're in the room. They're accountable to another human being in the space, which gives them a sense of buy-in as well as agency. So you can keep the level of engagement high by just kind of shifting around what the participants are asked to do,
Mhm.
and in what ways they can share with one another, giving folks who don't feel comfortable speaking a non-verbal way to contribute, giving folks who maybe feel a sense of stage fright in a big room, right, even if it's a digital space, a chance to go into a smaller group to digest something.
Mhm.
They're really simple structural things you can do with a tool like Zoom that give people a chance to stay present with the meeting instead of feeling like they can just kind of like turn off the video and just like zone out while somebody chats for 30 minutes about a presentation.
Mhm. So going back, we're getting back. Most it seems that most companies are taking a hybrid approach. Some employees are given the option to work remotely. Other employees can come into work. I think that creates a lot of risk where employees who are working from home are going to miss those serendipitous interactions that lead to promotions, all kinds of stuff. Like that's why you gather as a group, is you're able to build friendships at work. You're able to talk to people that aren't part of your team. You're able to access innovation. There's a ton of research coming out that shows when you're isolated, innovation stops to flow. Innovation actually comes from having a network of multiple people across teams. So it's not just about, your direct team. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what do organizations need to think about when it comes to their remote workforces, and also when it comes to this hybrid approach that we're going to take? How do you bring in the remote workforce that wants to work from home but still maintain that connection to the broader culture of the company?
Yeah, I think that the latter part of that question around the hybrid approach is still sort of like that's emergent, right? We're that's an experiment we're currently running as a
Yeah.
society. So I think that it's in a way, I feel like there's a sense of almost too early to call like what that's going to be like for people, because we have never tried this before. But I think that the piece that stands out to me on any level of engagement with a remote workforce is this idea that in an increasingly algorithm and tech driven world, the the human parts of our experience in the workforce in any relationship matter more than ever. And these things that I think have been traditionally considered like soft skills, as maybe that's just the domain of HR, like they're now like required reading, so to speak, for every leader, rising leaders or established leaders. They're this need for emotional literacy, emotional intelligence, being able to what a friend of mine is a leadership consultant and works for like Disney and NASA, and he goes in and gives presentations on things called authentic colleagues. The idea that not just leaders have these skills, but everybody in the organization is able to meet one another in their experience and ask the right questions to keep somebody bought in, right, to keep somebody uh performing and moving forward with their work, and not necessarily like leaving somebody out of the picture because they're not included at that roundtable discussion, right? That knowing the right questions to ask, and coming into a meeting prepared to have that part of the meeting really be the lion's share of the energy and time that's spent, is like finding out exactly what's going on with this person and what they need, at not just a task level of like, oh yeah, like we need to install this software or train this person, but also like at a deeper level, right? At an experiential level, like what's important to you to feel included in this, right? And what especially on teams that are kind of global or cross cultural, you need to be sensitive to those differences. And I had an example from a client. It was like around the or no, actually I read this in a book. It was like something as simple as knowing that like this team in Asia needs a briefing before the meeting or they feel disrespected,
Hmm.
right? Versus like people from like I would just show up to a meeting and be like, cool, tell me what are we doing? Let's jump in. You know what I mean? Versus like having like some minutes sent out in advance might be more important to a team that's in another place. And so knowing that you need to be asking questions that are supportive of how people show up to a process can give you a lot of leverage in engaging remote teams. And those aren't necessarily things that come with the playbook. It's like assumed that everybody's bought in at a certain level, but those assumptions can get in the way of being effective.
Mhm.
And so that's what I think is like really kind of driving um, engagement in remote teams. And from the colleagues I have in the experience in this sort of radical shift we're going through around, some of this is going to remain remote. The common denominator is human beings. And it's like through all the tech, the passion and the energy, the excitement, the humor, the momentum, that comes from human relationships. And that's always the secret sauce that's driving high performing teams and really like engaging cultures, places where people don't want to leave, where they're excited to work. And we need to be able to continue to have that even when we're on Zoom, even when we have remote teams.
So,
Having that
so give us an example. That I love that point. At the end of the day, relationships drive energy. They drive new ideas. They drive everything. I love that point. What for businesses? What can that look like? What do you see that looking like?
I think it's really taking time to honor it and to elevate it as a priority for the organization, like making space for it, hiring for it, training for it, celebrating it, making it visible and real and known that this is part of what we're doing here. And there's amazing resources out there for it. There's tons of research that's been done on this. I think more and more like you've been talking about vulnerability, people like Brene Brown have really become popular lately in reshaping our relationship with this in workforce culture, and not really having it be this marginal thing that's kind of just on the side and only like, yeah, HR cares about it, but like really making it part of what we're here to do. You know what I mean? We're here to enjoy this work. We're here to support each other as people. There's the toolkit I use, authentic relating, is becoming more and more popular with team building, with leadership, training for emotional intelligence, and these other skills around, not just competencies for the role, but competencies for connection, competencies for people management.
I
Um,
think before COVID, we didn't really think about this. We weren't that intentional about connection.
I don't know that I fully agree with that, but I think that that's brought it more into the limelight.
Mm,
It's sort of, maybe I would say it was more taken for granted. So yeah, maybe you're right. It
yeah,
was something that wasn't as intentionally engaged with. But yeah, recognizing that the connection desert, right, is part of what was really creating a lot of stress and burnout and hopelessness, frankly, and it going through this experience. And the teams that are able to support one another as human beings are the teams that are able to come through this on top.
really great points. Gabe, thanks so much. Thanks so much for the time. So much for your insight. If people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Thanks, Paul. They can reach me on my website, effectiveconnection.com. I think that's probably the best way to get in touch with me. And I'm going to be actually launching a training program around some of this stuff in June called Inner Edge. And they'll be able to find more on that on my website as well. It's effectiveconnection.com/inner edge. And yeah, that would be the best way to reach me. You can also reach me via email at gabe@effectiveconnection.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing your insights. And I look forward to seeing and hearing more from you in the next year. We'll have to do another follow up to find out how that hybrid experiment is going.
I'd love to, Paul, because it is an experiment, right? And I'm not here with a crystal ball. Like, I'm just out there working with people trying to solve this problem and learning from those experiences every day. So it's going to be an interesting transition, and I'll definitely be part of it and look forward to that conversation too.
Great. Thanks, Gabe.
Thanks, Paul.